Very graciously, the Queen came to the hospital to consult with Mr. Macmillan on the appointment of his successor. It wasn't long before the news was out. The choice was Lord Hume. The nurses were more interested in getting a view as Her Majesty left to return to the palace.
Alec Douglas Hume was a politician who belonged to an older era. An aristocrat who was educated at Eton and then Oxford, he was only able to become Prime Minister because Tony Benn, then Viscount Stansgate, campaigned for the right to give up his peerage so he could enter the House of Commons. Even so, Alec Douglas Hume's accession to the premiership is constitutionally unprecedented. He remains the last Prime Minister to be appointed whilst he was sitting in the House of Lords, and because of how it had to happen, he gave up his seat in the House of Lords in order to fight a by-election. There was a 20-day period where he was Prime Minister without sitting either in the House of Commons or in the House of Lords. Alec Douglas Hume first entered Parliament in 1931, and within 6 years he became Principal Private Secretary to Neville Chamberlain. Now this meant that Hume had front row seats to Chamberlain's attempt to appease Hitler in the run-up to World War II. Now this could have been damaging to Hume further along in his career, and indeed it was damaging to some of the figures around Chamberlain at the time. I'm thinking of people like Rab Butler. And despite the fact that Hume always held the view that appeasement was the right policy because it gave Britain the chance to rebuild its arms in the run-up to the war, it never really stuck with Hume. It never really damaged his career. Hume volunteered to fight in World War II, but during the medical examination, it was discovered that he had tuberculosis of the spine. Now this led to pioneering surgery, which left him in hospital for 2 years, encased in plaster, and he was only to return to the House of Commons in 1943. He went on to fight his Lanark seat in the 1950 election, but soon after winning, his father died and he was elevated to the House of Lords. Now, this didn't stop his career. In fact, he went on to be Minister for Scotland, Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, and then, controversially, he was made Foreign Secretary. It was controversial because, of course, sitting in the House of Lords, he couldn't be held to account by the House of Commons. As a character, Hume was calm in the face of crisis, which served him well as a minister, and it served him well more generally, as this story attests to. According to Hume, he was followed home by some left-wing students, and when they knocked on the door and he opened, he was by himself, they said to him, "We're going to kidnap you." And he said, "Well, you can do that, but if you do, the Conservatives are going to win the next election by 200 or 300 seats. He offered them some beers, and they swiftly went home. In October 1963, Harold Macmillan was taken ill just before the Conservative Party conference, and he announced that he would stand down as Prime Minister as soon as a successor was in place. The Times newspaper considered Alec Douglas Hume to be an outside chance of becoming Prime Minister behind Lord Hailsham, Rab Butler and Reginald Maudling. But in the end, Hume proved to be the compromise candidate who could unite the party behind him. So he was selected to lead, not in a democratic election, but by the so-called magic circle of party insiders, the last Conservative leader to be appointed in this way. Alec Douglas Hume inherited the premiership at a difficult time for the Conservative Party. By this point in time, they had been in power for 13 years, and Macmillan's premiership had been damaged by the Profumo affair, an affair between Secretary for War John Profumo and Christine Keeler, who was also sleeping with the Soviet attaché. It's always difficult to inherit power at the end of a long period with one party in charge, as the number of gripes the country have with the governing party steadily builds, and so does the desire for change. So it would be an uphill task for Hume, who had to call an election in 1964 and face the youthful, witty and dynamic Harold Wilson as leader of the Labour Party. In the end, Hume served as Prime Minister for less than 1 year, so there are few creditable achievements attached to his tenure. Indeed, the one lasting achievement of his time in office, the abolition of retail price maintenance, is, in reality, an achievement of Edward Heath. Retail price maintenance had allowed suppliers to fix the price that their goods needed to be sold for by retailers, which kept prices artificially high. The abolition of this price fixing hurt smaller shopkeepers and paved the way for the dominance of major supermarkets, but By bringing in competition, it drove down prices for consumers. In the end, the 1964 election was a close-run thing. Labour went into the campaign with a poll lead, but the polls narrowed and the final result was a Labour lead of just 0.7 percentage points, or around 200,000 votes, giving Wilson a slender majority of just 4 seats. It was a tiny margin of victory and would be a turning point both in Alec Douglas Hume's career and in British post-war history. I do feel some sympathy for Alec Douglas Hume, as it was always going to be difficult to take over the leadership of a party at the end of a long period in office, especially when the previous Prime Minister was embroiled in a scandal not of his own making. But despite this, I have to conclude that Alec Douglas Hume achieved very little in office and lost the only election he fought, albeit by a small margin. So he has to be placed towards the bottom of any league table of post-war Prime Ministers, above those like Liz Truss who did active damage in their brief tenure, but below those able to implement change and win elections. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. For now, goodbye and best wishes.